Even as the theatrical side of the movie business continues its slow recovery, it's still a treacherous time in Hollywood as studios scramble to figure out which of their franchises remain relevant and which are best put out to pasture. Yet there does come a time when even the money-grabbing executives know that a series' time in the sun is over, and that certainly seems to be the case with the following 10 franchises. Each of them just crashed out spectacularly, whether underwhelming at the box office or failing to stir up substantial interest on streaming, suggesting that audiences en masse simply don't have much interest in them anymore. And while it is certainly possible that studios might take one last swing at these properties, it's also not outside the realm of possibility that they may well be put on an indefinite hiatus. So with that in mind then, I'm Ellie with What Culture, here with 10 movie franchises that just died. Number 10, Resident Evil. Oh, Resident Evil. It's fascinating how such a beloved video game franchise has had so much trouble manifesting a quality live-action adaptation. Although Paul W.S. Anderson's original 6-movie series at least proved commercially successful. After that franchise wrapped up with 2016's Resident Evil: The Final Chapter, it was only inevitable that it would get the reboot treatment soon enough, and late last year, Resident Evil: Welcome to Raccoon City was released. The reboot largely landed with a thud though, receiving primarily negative reviews and failing to turn a profit at the box office. Despite performing relatively well on video on demand, that likely isn't enough to move the needle for a sequel. For context, Welcome to Raccoon City grossed less than half of the lowest grossing Anderson movie, which was 2002's original Resident Evil. Though Netflix's recently released Resident Evil spin-off series posted solid viewership figures out of the gate, between the mixed critical reviews and overwhelmingly negative fan response, it too seems unlikely to score any sort of follow-up, especially with its evidently large budget. While it's a given that Hollywood won't stop trying to make Resident Evil a thing, with 2 major adaptations falling flat within barely a 6-month period, it's highly likely that we won't be seeing another live-action Resident Evil anytime soon. Number 9, Hotel Transylvania. Though the Hotel Transylvania franchise has received consistently mixed notices from critics, the response from general audiences has been considerably more positive, with the first 3 films all receiving an A- cinema score while grossing a combined $1.36 billion globally. A 4th film, Hotel Transylvania Transformania, was released this past January and billed as the final entry into the franchise. But between Sony foregoing a theatrical release and selling the streaming rights to Amazon, and Adam Sandler not reprising his role as Count Dracula, it did very much feel like an unfortunate downer swan song for the series. Reviews were once again mixed, and Transformania went on to receive the lowest Rotten Tomatoes audience score of the series, rocking in a mere 45% approval rate. The sequel came and went without much of a trace, and while Sony likely avoided losing money on the movie by selling it to Amazon for $100 million, it didn't exactly suggest that Sony has much continued interest in the IP, even with the potential to continue the series through a batch of short films. It seems very much like Sony knew they had a dud on their hands, especially without Adam Sandler's involvement, and so decided to cut their losses from both the project and the franchise as a whole. Number 8, Roland Emmerich's disaster movies. Over the last 30 years, Roland Emmerich has proven himself to be a one-man industry where disaster movies are concerned. And though his blockbuster epics typically don't exist within the same continuity, it's safe to say that Independence Day, Godzilla 1998, The Day After Tomorrow 2012, and Moonfall all feel cut from the same tonal and stylistic cloth. Yet the recent release of Emmerich's Moonfall likely represents the end of an era for the director, because while his movies have rarely received much above wildly mixed reviews, it was his 3rd big-budget blockbuster in a row to flop commercially. Independence Day Resurgence, Midway and Moonfall all fell far short of box office expectations, and so it's looking incredibly unlikely that Emmerich will continue to be afforded these monstrous budgets in the future. The general audience's appetite for EMMERICH'S brainless brand of destruction porn has seemingly finally been sated, and while he'll certainly still have work on lower budget thrillers and action flicks, his days of making $200 million tentpoles are almost definitely over. Number 7. Morbius. It's always fascinating to see a studio put the cart before the horse, so to speak, and outline their franchise plans for a movie before it's even been released. Case in point, we have Morbius, which, in addition to being an entry into Sony's Spider-Man universe, was intended to kickstart a series of movies centered around Marvel's C-tier superhero, Morbius the Living Vampire. Yet those plans quickly went up in smoke, as in addition to being panned by most critics, Morbius underperformed at the box office, grossing just $163.9 million worldwide. Hilariously, it's also the only film on this list which actually suffered the embarrassment of bombing twice, as due to the popularity of Morbius-related memes online, Sony decided to re-release it in 1,000 cinemas in June, seemingly unaware that the social media fanfare was thoroughly ironic, and as a result, Morbius cratered commercially twice, which made it even more of an abject laughingstock and surely sealed its fate as a failed attempt to make fetch happen. Now, while it is possible that we might see Morbius show up in another entry into Sony's Spider-Man universe, I don't imagine Morbius 2 will ever be made. Number 6. Downton Abbey. As much as Hollywood would like us to forget it, sometimes it's absolutely fine for a franchise to just age out and end. That's certainly the case with Downton Abbey, which, following the massive success of 2019's spin-off movie from the hit TV show, dropped a second movie earlier this year, Downton Abbey: A New Era. And while the sequel grossed over $90 million worldwide, that's quite a tumble from the first film, which grossed over double that with just half the budget. And so Universal may well read the writing on the wall here, that general audiences are basically over Downton Abbey, as much as creator Julian Fellowes has talked up the possibility of a third film in the future. If A New Era did gangbusters business on streaming, then a threequel isn't impossible by any means. But considering that the film felt like a solid farewell to these characters and this world, it'd be a pretty graceful time to bow out. A franchise ending doesn't always have to be a bad or sad thing. And in Downton Abbey's case, it just kind of feels right. Number 5. Home Alone. The Home Alone franchise is a shambling, decrepit zombie of a movie IP that just keeps going. Or so it seems. Even though the series has struggled to strike much of a chord with general audiences outside of its first two Macaulay Culkin starring efforts, the 6th film in the franchise was released late last year. Home Sweet Home Alone was a putrid attempt to reboot the series for Disney+, an insanely low-effort reimagining which lacked the charm of the original two films while also making ill-advised changes to the fundamental premise. It received brutal reviews from critics and audiences alike, which, in addition to mediocre viewing figures on its opening weekend, effectively killed the prospect of any sequels. Now, while it's highly unlikely that Disney will leave the Home Alone IP alone forevermore, we probably won't see much from it for a while the company tries to figure out how to monetize the once beloved franchise. Number 4. Jeepers Creepers. After Jeepers Creepers 3 failed to turn a profit at the box office in 2017, it's genuinely surprising that a fourth film, Jeepers Creepers Reborn, actually went into production. And though the movie, a reimagining of the franchise, completed principal photography back in February 2021, its release was held up due to a lawsuit filed by Myriad Pictures, who asserted that the movie was produced without their involvement or consent. While it was possible that Reborn would simply never be released as a result, it was recently announced to be getting a 3-night theatrical release in September, with a video-on-demand bout presumably set to follow shortly thereafter. Even so, expect the law of diminishing returns to kick in full force here, with Reborn turning even less of a profit than the third film, especially as it's reportedly disconnected from the lore of the original trilogy. Nobody asked for this, and even the series' long-suffering fans have largely lost interest. Number 3. Ice Age. Once upon a time, Ice Age was an absolute juggernaut at the box office, what with the 5 theatrically released films grossing in $3.2 billion worldwide. While it's fair to say that 2016's Ice Age Collision Course marked the series' decline with audiences, grossing $408.5 million, less than half of its predecessor, the series' sensible budgeting ensured it still turned a solid profit. Development of a 6th film stalled somewhat when Ice Age studio Blue Sky Studios was acquired by Disney in 2019, and last year Disney closed Blue Sky amid the economic impact of the pandemic. At this point, the franchise pivoted to servicing Disney Plus with the release of the recent Scrat Tales shorts, produced by Blue Sky before their closure, and a spin-off film, The Ice Age Adventure of Buck Wild, which was outsourced to Bardell Entertainment. The Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild was centered around Simon Pegg's one-eyed weasel Buck, yet Pegg was the only original cast member to appear, with every other voice actor being replaced with a presumably cheaper alternative. The spin-off was panned by critics and received mediocre reviews from audiences, who all criticised the slack script, absent cast members, and most importantly, the cruddy, cheap animation quality. Now, Disney still lists a 6th mainline Ice Age film as in development, but the Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild are a pretty damning indication of how little Disney actually cares about the IP, and so I wouldn't be surprised if it never materializes. Considering that some of Blue Sky's animators released a brief farewell short to fans earlier this year, in which Scrat finally got his damn acorn, it actually feels like the right time to close up shop. Number 2. Fantastic Beasts. On paper, the Fantastic Beasts franchise seems like a slam dunk proposition for Warner Brothers, a natural means to continue the Wizarding World IP. With an all-star cast, a bevy of enticing new characters, and a prequel status allowing it to fill the fan-serving gaps ahead of the Harry Potter films, it'd surely be catnip to fans, right? Well, 2016's Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them certainly seem to suggest so, posting solidly positive reviews and a healthy $814 million global box office. As such, plans for a 5-film series were put into overdrive, with sequel The Crimes of Grindelwald releasing just 2 years later. And yet reviews were wildly mixed, with many criticising the convoluted plot, contradictions of existing franchise lore, and overabundance of setup for future films. The Crimes of Grindelwald also grossed a mediocre $654.9 million worldwide, a significant drop from its predecessor, yet certainly not enough to stop the gravy train in its tracks. And following a difficult production which had to deal with the pandemic, Johnny Depp's replacement with Mads Mikkelsen, and increasing pushback against J.K. Rowling for her controversial comments on the trans community, threequel The Secrets of Dumbledore finally hit screens this past April. Though better received than its direct predecessor, reviews were still mixed, and it went on to gross just $405.2 million worldwide. This ensured it failed to turn a profit for Warner Brothers, the break-even point for a $200 million film typically being around $500 million. Now, Warner Brothers haven't yet made a public ruling on the future of the series, but The Secrets of Dumbledore's performance is undeniably an emphatic rejection from general audiences. Now, reportedly, the studios were waiting for the release of the 3rd film before they decided whether or not the 4th and 5th installments would go ahead, so the future is looking rather dire for the franchise. Now, it is possible that Warner Brothers might release just one more film to just tie everything up, and they may even directly release it to HBO Max as opposed to a theatrical release. But it's safe to say that the general mainstream interest in this corner of the Wizarding world has well and truly dried up. Number 1. God's Not Dead. Now, if you're not familiar with the God's Not Dead franchise, then we apologise in advance for changing that. The Christian drama franchise kicked off in 2014 when the first film became an unexpected smash hit at the box office, despite overwhelmingly negative reviews, grossing more than $60 million on a mere $2 million budget. God's Not Dead 2 didn't perform nearly as well, but still turned a sizable profit relative to its small budget, and again in the face of a critical drubbing. But the wheels finally began to come off with 2018's threequel God's Not Dead, A Light in Darkness. Now, the third film only made $7.4 million worldwide, with analysts suggesting that even the literally most devout faithful saw this sequel as a blatant cash grab. But in an attempt to wring every last drop of blood out of the stone, a fourth film, God's Not Dead, We the People, was released last year, though only received a 3-night theatrical release through Fathom Events. Grossing a paltry $1.1 million while receiving few mainstream critical reviews, it's safe to say that the series' time is up. And while it could still try and eke out a living on streaming, clearly even the die-hard target audience has lost interest in it. Now, God may or may not be dead, but this franchise definitely is. And that concludes our list. If you think we missed any, then do let us know in the comments below, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss a What Culture video. Also, head over to Twitter and follow us there, and I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Littlechild. I've been Ellie with What Culture. I hope you have a magical day, and I'll see you real soon.